Thank you for that very fulsome introduction. And General Jayasuriya, distinguished officials, officers, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for having me. It's a great honor to be here. Thank you also for organizing this conference. And as I said when I accepted the invitation to speak, I believe that the defeat of the Tamil Tigers represents an extremely important achievement that needs to be discussed and studied in detail. At the same time, the international community has some legitimate questions about the way that those operations were conducted, and in particular issues of human rights. I'm very encouraged by Sri Lanka's willingness to engage openly in a discussion about those issues, and I think it can only be to the benefit of Sri Lanka and also to those of us who wish to study these issues to talk about these concerns openly. Before I begin, I want to note that I am right off a plane from Afghanistan at about 9 o'clock this morning. So I'm speaking with another war in my head. You live here, I'm just visiting, and I come as an outsider to offer an outsider's perspective. And I hope that during this week, I'll have the opportunity to learn from you and to understand your perspective better on the operations that we're talking about. I'd like to focus my remarks on three topic areas. Firstly, the issue of tactics and strategy. Secondly, the human rights questions that I already spoke about. And then finally, the issue of a just and sustainable peace, the issue of reconciliation. As others today, better qualified than myself, have already pointed out, the Elam 4 campaign was a remarkable achievement with important lessons for other militaries facing capable, irregular opponents like the Tamil Tigers. The Sri Lankan Armed Forces applied innovative tactics, combining guerrilla and conventional tactics, joint operations, and constant organizational adaptation. Most importantly, Sri Lanka applied these tactics in the service of an effective strategic plan. This plan took advantage of the Tigers' main weaknesses, as we've already talked about today: the hierarchical and conventional structure, their reliance on international support, their adoption of conventional warfighting tactics. Elam 4, as we know, and as has just been explained in the last session, was only the last campaign in a very protracted conflict. And the Tigers had over time gained extremely significant conventional military capability. They'd begun to fight as a semi-conventional armed force. That had very important implications for strategy, because the Tigers were more of a conventional organization than a traditional guerrilla force by the time of the final operations. One key innovation which has been taken note of by specialists in this field overseas was the Special Infantry Operations Training, which was introduced as part of the preparation for the final campaigns. Now, this increased the capabilities of the individual Sri Lankan soldier and the small unit. A focus on small unit excellence is one of the best practices of counterinsurgency. This is one of the key distinguishing features between military forces that do well at this type of conflict and those that do poorly. In the case of Sri Lanka, Special Infantry Operations Training allowed the small unit to carry out complex operations both in and behind enemy lines and in complex terrain. It also developed the soldier himself, nurturing professionalism within the army and revitalizing confidence in the organization itself, in its skills, and in conventional units. Because of those developments in ability and professionalism, the ground forces were able to maintain a high and constant attrition rate against the Tigers in the final phase of the campaign. Even though a large part of the campaign was fought in a conventional manner, especially towards the end, this shift of emphasis and training under SIOT allowed Sri Lanka to wage an effective guerrilla, or should I say counter-guerrilla, operation at the same time as those conventional operations were taking place. The three armed services, the national and local police, the civil security service, and special forces and commando units all conducted combined or partnered operations. And these are a vital aspect and another best practice in counterinsurgency. Again, forces that conduct partnered operations down to the lowest level bringing together police, civil administration, and military forces, tend, in general terms, to do much better than those that try to operate alone. Sri Lanka was not only innovative in the area of tactics, though. I think, in particular, one of the things that's been noticed by people who've studied the campaign from abroad is the way that Sri Lanka's military learned from, adapted to, and overcame various operational obstacles as a learning organization. One of the hallmarks of Elam 4 was the attention given to nurturing tactical innovation from experienced combat-proven soldiers, regardless of their rank. Training programs like AIPT, the Advanced Infantry Platoon Training, are being looked at from overseas now as ways to think about improving access to the knowledge and the innovation of junior ranks. Again, this is a best practice in counterinsurgency. Armies in particular, but also navies and police forces and air forces that draw on the experience and insights of junior officers close to the battle who've learned and proven themselves in combat tend again to do better than organizations that are top-down and driven by the boss. Empowering younger and combat-proven leaders, promoting in particular proven NCOs to fill the ranks of officer shortages is, again, a best practice. Now, although those tactical advances were important, their greatest advantage, I think, came from the strategy that they supported, the integration of tactical improvement with improved strategy. And the government strategy accurately assessed and attacked the Tigers' key operational weaknesses. As we've already heard today, the Tigers claimed to represent the political goals of all Sri Lanka's Tamil population. But the schism within the LTTE, the split with Colonel Karuna in 2004, gave the lie to that claim. It undermined the claim to represent all Tamils. And it led the Tigers to mistreat and alienate the population, particularly in the east of Sri Lanka, as part of that split. The Sri Lankan army was very quick to exploit that divide, employing the local knowledge of Karuna's troops, along with their own newly trained and advanced forces, to gain control of the entire eastern province by August of 2007. That seems, perhaps to some people in this room, like a relatively easy task, but to respond so quickly to a political change in the enemy's structure shows great agility, and it's all too rare in counterinsurgency. Something we call political maneuver or political agility. As we've also talked about in the immediate session before this one, the Tigers relied very heavily on international funding and support from the Tamil diaspora. The post-9/11 crackdown on international terrorist funding severely reduced that source of finance for the Tigers. The military, especially the Sri Lankan Navy, was poised and ready to exploit that by focusing heavily on destroying the Tigers' supply ships, their floating warehouses, and land-based storage sites, confident that the material so destroyed wouldn't be replenished. Another key element of the strategy focused, as we said, on the Tigers' hierarchical structure, what you might almost call a cult of personality within their conventional warfare approach. They had a very definite chain of command, a very firm organizational structure, and they were not, in fact, anywhere close to as adaptable as the Sri Lankan military by the end of the campaign. This, again, is very unusual. Most insurgent forces are much more adaptable than the governments that they oppose. But in this particular case, because of the innovations in the way that the Sri Lankan army had developed its capability, while opposed against a conventional top-down, very rigid, hierarchical organization, Sri Lanka gained the adaptation advantage. The Tigers, as we've seen, chose to confront the government in a symmetrical way in terms of open warfare. And in response, the Sri Lankan army destroyed them through a kinetic operation that developed a tempo, a mass, and an operational capability that the Tigers couldn't match. The army's combination of conventional and counter-guerrilla tactics denied the Tigers a competitive advantage, while the tempo of operations prevented the Tigers from regrouping. And finally, of course, the size of the Sri Lankan military, which was recruiting nearly 3,000 soldiers a month by the end of 2008, gave the military a mass advantage, which allowed them to dominate the Tigers toward the end of the campaign. It's pretty clear that this mass advantage and the ability to maintain a high kinetic tempo was applied in a very enemy-centric way to destroy the bulk of the armed forces of the Tamil Tigers. And I think a lot of the key to the success of this campaign, which is being studied overseas, focuses on that question. And I'll come back to that in a minute. Finally, and this is something of a controversial point, the strategy adopted gave the Tigers no opening to surrender. Now, it's normal in counterinsurgency to provide an open avenue